Okay, this is chapters 8 through 10 in Born in the Years of Courage. John Mung. Manjiro gave up on going back to sleep. It was as if the August sun that had beat down through the day had been trapped in their quarters, which were stifling even at best. A bell had struck not long ago. Soon after he and his friends had come aboard, Manjiro had come to understand that the bells marked the time. He now knew that the men were divided into two watches, the starboard watch and the larboard watch, Larboard. The watches were on duty for 4-hour stretches, except for the early morning 2-hour dog watch. And since he did not know the hours the bells indicated, he did not know whether the night had much or little time left. He swung down from his hammock, stood with his feet planted apart until he adjusted to the ship's roll, went past the restless men and up the forecastle companionway, slid open the scuttle slide and stepped onto the deck. There was no moon, but the stars were so brilliant the lanterns looked wan by comparison. Not that bright. Scanning the heavens to check the positions on the constellations, he decided it was not long, perhaps an hour before daybreak. This was much better, he thought, as he went across the deck to the bulwark. The sound of water rushing against the hull and the hum of the breeze in the rigging were restful. One of the men on duty cleared his throat and another sang quietly. Manjiro waited. His eyelids were heavy now, but it would only be a little longer. The stars were fading. It became very dark. There, day was breaking to the fore of the ship, the first gray streaks spreading across the horizon. Then came the strange light on the sea that filled him with longing and loneliness. Someone was walking in the light. Shadowy as the image was, Manjiro recognized the male figure. It was himself, but an older self, a man grown. His mother was walking toward him. She was older too. Gray streaked her hair. Manjiro felt himself slipping down onto the deck, felt the sleep breathing that kept time with the ship's rocking. A shout awakened him. The two words, "There blows!" echoed in his ears as he got to his feet. The sun was up and a man high in the rigging exclaimed, "There blows!" his voice ringing with excitement. Billy, a big smile spread across his face, read past Manjiro. "Whales," Billy said. Manjiro ran to catch up with Billy. Others were running. Captain Whitfield called to the man who had spotted the whales. "Where away?" There were more questions and answers between the captain and the sailor who saw the whales. Then Manjiro heard the call, "Lower away." Jake, one of the men who had come in a whaling boat to rescue them from Rock Island, was going after a whale. So was Benjamin, the dark-skinned man who had carried Jasuki to the boat, and Ira Davis, an intense, somewhat nervous man. "Harpooners," Billy said. The harpooners chanted as they left. Manjiro caught none of the words, but he sensed that those on board worried for the men going out to kill the whale. While he and Billy stood facing the bow, Captain Whitfield called orders and the yards swung to the left. "Larboard," Billy said. The yards swung to the right. "Starboard," Billy said, and the men sang out the sheets as they took in sail. The John Holland, Manjiro realized, had to stay reasonably close to the whaling boats, but not so close that it interfered with the chase. Now and then Captain Whitfield, with the long glass to his eye, gave a report. When a cheer went up, Manjiro knew that a whale had been killed and that the men in the boats were safe. A hush fell among the crew, and Toraman, at Manjiro's side, said, "After the victory comes the remorse." Manjiro knew what Toraman meant. He had experienced the exhilaration of bringing in a big fish, and he had known the moment of pain for taking its life. He had always thought it was because of the teaching that all things belonged to Buddha. But now, just as Toraman said, he saw the fleeting identity with the whale in the faces of these men who knew nothing of Buddha. The boats were coming now with the dead whale in tow. In its wake, a red stain colored the water. The ship lay at a standstill, lowering and raising its bow as if it were impatient to be on its way again. With his Tosa friends, Manjiro watched men lash the enormous open-eyed corpse to the side of the ship. "Do you remember the saying that one whale means a time of riches for all of Tosa?" Fujinojo asked. "But we on Tosa do not have the boats nor the tools these men have for whaling." The thought came swiftly into Manjiro's mind. "I will learn about the boats and harpoons and how to get oil from the whale, and what I will learn will help our people." He pictured their faces as he told them about whaling. The farmer whose rice he had polished would be there, and the old wise man and the fisherman. They would all be listening attentively, nodding now and then. At the fringe of the group would stand his mother, smiling proudly. Manjiro drew in his breath. In the time before sunrise, he had a vision, or a dream, of meeting his mother. And just now he pictured himself telling the people of his village about whaling. Surely this meant that he would return to his homeland. He closed his eyes and tried to recapture the details of the vision. Perhaps it had not been a vision at all. The sea at first break of day had cast a spell over him, and his hope of returning home had made itself into a dream. He opened his eyes and straightened his shoulders, but the thought that he would learn about whaling so he could help his people was not a dream. That was purpose. Mentally recording each step, he watched men lower 2 narrow platforms partway down the side of the hull to a point above the whale. Men, secured by ropes to keep them from falling amidst the sharks the dead whale had attracted, went down to the platforms. The men had sharp, pointed knives on long handles. Beginning behind the whale's nose, they cut a spiral from its flesh in a continuous strip. Men raised the great strips of whale flesh onto the deck. Others cut the flesh into blocks for boiling the fat out in the huge pots. The fire had been started with wood, but now the crisp, cooked-out pieces of flesh and fat were the fuel. With slings and tackles, other men took barrels of oil to the hold. All through that day and the next day and into the third day, Manjiro would sleep a while, then go to watch again. Between the stench of the whale's rotting flesh and the stench of the smoke, he became so sick to his stomach he couldn't eat. "Why do you punish yourself like this?" Fudenoju asked. "It is foolish." "I want to learn," Manjiro said. Fudenoju shook his head. "What is there to learn the third day that you did not learn the first day?" There was always something new to learn, Manjiro thought, but if he said that, it would sound as if he were being critical of his Tosa friends. "Sometimes my attention has wandered," he said instead. When all was done, very little of the whale went to the sharks. Even the whale's ashes would be used to make soap to scrub down the oily decks, Billy told Manjiro. Although he still could not converse much with the sailors, Manjiro now understood most of what was said. One day he heard the sailors talking about a country called Japan. "They call us barbarians," one of the men said. Manjiro sat very still. The country they called Japan must be Dai Nippon, and these men were among his countrymen called barbarians. Another man told of how America's crippled ships had put into port on a small Japanese island. "They put our men in jail," he said, "and when they escaped, the black-hearted knaves put them in cages." Chill bumps broke out in Manjiro's arms. Fudenoju had been wise to choose not to tell the name of their country, and he, Manjiro, had been wise to listen and learn without talking about his own life. They were saying that the people in Dai Nippon were not nice to them. As time passed, he became increasingly restless. He wanted to work, but he knew he must wait for Fudenoju to approach the captain. Manjiro paced. He sighed. He said, "I'm getting fat." "We need to work," Fudenoju finally said. "I will speak to Captain Whitfield." He started toward the captain. Manjiro cleared his throat. "When the captain is on the quarterdeck, we must ask the officer of the deck's permission to speak with him," he said. Fudenoju stopped walking and looked at him in surprise. Fudenoju, Manjiro realized, had not observed this procedure. He was glad he had spoken up. Fudenoju would have been embarrassed when he later realized that he had not acted according to the Americans' protocol. Fudenoju spoke to Mr. Burke. When Fudenoju had gained permission, he approached Captain Whitfield. Manjiro could not pull all Fudenoju had said about feeling unworthy and desiring to help in the captain's language. Manjiro could not put it all in his language. He only said, "Wish work, please." Captain Whitfield did not look at Manjiro. He looked directly at Fudenoju. Then he shook Fudenoju's hand. How wise this Captain Whitfield is, Manjiro thought. Early the next morning, he and his friends began to work with other men at the daily chore of cleaning and swabbing the decks. They knotted yarns and scraped rust from the chain cables. Manjiro was now comfortable enough in the sail rigging that he was allowed to help with the endless upkeep and repair. But since they were not assigned to a watch, they still had free time. Captain Whitfield gave them permission to wander anywhere they liked. One afternoon, they went down in the hold and saw cows and pigs there. Manjiro held his face expressionless when he realized that the two men who tended the animals, and no doubt slaughtered those that became the meat the cook prepared, ate and slept in the same quarters with the rest of the crew. In his country, men who slaughtered animals were eta, filled with filth. Like that was the lowest group. Because they did un-Buddhist work, no one associated with them. It was as if they were invisible. Manjiro knew the others were as horrified as he. He also knew that they would never discuss the matter with each other, nor give any indications of their feelings about eating with eta. America, he thought, evidently had no caste system. Remember, the castes are the orders of, like, the grouping of the people. Eta were not shunned. Officers talked and laughed with sailors in lowly positions. When he and Billy had a learning session, Manjiro sketched a ship with an American flag, except he only put one big star on the flag. On the ship's deck, he drew figures of officers and cooks in green hands standing side by side, all smiling. Billy snorted. Then, with pictures and words, he told Manjiro that he and his friends were lucky to get picked up by Captain Whitfield. On most ships, Billy told him, the after gang, which included all officers, didn't mix with the forecastle men. But on the John Howland, everybody mixes free and easy. Manjiro nodded. On board ship, the association between officers and crew depended on the captain. But that did not explain the system in America, and he didn't know how to make his question clear. On the John Howland, even the captain's door is open to everyone, Billy said. He put his fingers on Manjiro's chest, including you. At first, Manjiro went timidly to Captain Whitfield's cabin. Captain Whitfield seemed to welcome the visit. He began to go more and more often to see the captain. He liked the smell of ink paper and varnished wood. He liked the quiet. He did not always mind the men's talk and laughter and swearing, but sometimes his ears pleaded for rest. The captain's charts intrigued him, as did a colorful round globe on a pedestal. The captain said the instruments in a rack were guns, rifles, and pistols, but the ammunition was under lock and key. We have never had occasion to use them, Captain Whitfield said, and I pray we never do. Once Manjiro went to the captain's open door and looked at a photograph of a lady. The captain was crying. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, "my wife." "She is—" "Yes," Captain Whitfield said, "she is dead." "My father, too," Manjiro told him. He regretted again, as he had many times, that he had not gone to the cemetery and told his father that he was going fishing. He felt sad and homesick and very close to Captain Whitfield. Not long after that visit, on a day when the sails drooped and small white clouds lazed across the sky, Mr. O'Brien, the second mate, told Mangiro he could go up and look for whales. Standing on a cross tree, two narrow, parallel sticks attached far above the deck to a mast, he searched the water for a spout, sometimes with his naked eyes, sometimes with the spyglass. For an hour he saw nothing. Then through the glass he saw a movement of water that didn't fit the wave pattern. Yes, a funnel-shaped spume. Pointing, he called, "There blows!" A minute later, someone in the rigging yellowed, "Sperm whale!" Mangiro looked down at the deck, saw men dancing with excitement, and remembered what Billy had told him about sperm whales. He had spotted the whale with expensive perfume in his intestines. When at last the boats returned with an enormous whale in tow, there was much rejoicing. Captain Whitfield put a sailor's cap on Mangiro's head. "A sailor on the John Howland should have a name we can pronounce," one of the men said. "I have it," another said. "John Mung." "John Mung," the others agreed. Mangiro smiled proudly. Not only had the crew given him the name of the ship, they had given him two names. He bowed and said, "John Mung thanks you." Billy smiled wide. "See how good I've taught him to talk American," he said. Okay, chapter 9 is called Typhoon. And that's the same as a hurricane on this side of the world. After 4 months on John Howland, Mangiro could get the gist of almost anything the men said, although he still found the various forms of speech mystifying. Some used thee and thou, while others did not. And some, Billy told him, were immigrants who had not yet learned to talk American good. Other than his difficulties with the language, Mangiro felt as if he were now part of the crew. This morning, he and his toaster friends had just finished helping to clean the decks when the 7 bells for breakfast sounded. He didn't say anything to the others, but an uneasiness prickled his scalp. The breeze in the sea seemed restless. He scanned the sky. The sun looked brassy, but there were no threatening clouds. Since he was not part of a regular watch, he went down to breakfast and came back up on deck. Clouds were now swelling on the horizon. The air and sea had an ominous feel about them. Captain Whitfield was on deck, his calm voice calling orders to the men aloft. Other men were raising the whaling boats higher up the hull and lashing them. Claus Ike, the carpenter, stood on the forecastle deck gazing at the building clouds and said, "We will get blow." "Pacific means peaceful," Jake said from behind Mangiro, "but it don't always live up to his name." He sounded excited. Why was Jake up here, Mangiro wondered. Jake was not on this watch. He was supposed to be resting. Jake stepped up beside Mangiro, grinned, and rubbed his hands together. "Here it comes." The clouds came suddenly, racing, billowing, blacking out sun and sky. Mr. Aiken ran to the forecastle hatchway and shouted, "All hands, tumble up here." "And take in sails, me hearty," Jake said to no one in particular. "You can go below if you want to, John." Frightened as he was, just standing, and they're calling him John, remember now, on the pitching deck, Mangiro shook his head and ran with Jake. He was part of the crew. He knew how to take in the sail. "Lower top mizzen sail," Jake said. "I'm right behind you." An eerie twilight closed around Mangiro as he crawled out on a yard. It was all right. He'd been a lot higher than this. Thunder crashed, and lightning bolts linked monstrous black waves to the blackness from whence they came. The wind howled. Rain came down like a slanting, blinding waterfall. Then the bucking ship tilted almost on its side. Mangiro gasped, lay across the yard, and held on. The ship came upright again. He had to get up from here. He had to help Jake, but his body would not obey. He couldn't turn loose. He was shaking violently, and he was sick. He was going to vomit. He couldn't hold it back. There it went, with the wind. The ship rolled again. Mangiro clenched his jaws to keep from screaming. His hands were moving now. They were working with the sail. They seemed to be detached from the rest of his body. No, please no. He was going to be sick again. Something was poking him. Jake was poking him hard, motioning for him to come down. From somewhere he heard the wind-borne call, "All snug aloft." When he was back on the deck, Mangiro kept his eyes lowered. Even now his body could not forget its terror. A rigger would go through him and he would think that was it. The shaking was over, and then it would hit again. "Go 'tween decks," Jake said through cupped hands into his ear, so his words would not be lost in the wind and rain, the pounding against the hull, the screeching of the swaying mass. It's like, "Go 'tween decks," like, go, get out of here. Mangiro soon realized why Jake had said to go between decks, where provisions were kept. It was more stable there than in the forecastle. The storm, a sailor told Mangiro, was a typhoon. "It's an old grandpa typhoon," he said, weak and tired out. Mangiro thought that if this was a grandpa typhoon, he was glad it had not visited them when it was young and strong. The John Howland buckled and rolled. Stirred up bilge water, the water that collected in the ship's bottom and became foul, filled the ship with a stink. Being between decks helped. Fudenoju's advice to drink nothing but tea and to eat nothing but hardtack helped. Still, Mangiro was sick to his stomach. He was even sicker at heart. Jake obviously had not told the others about his cowardice, how he had clung to the yard and had been a little help, but he knew he would have to live with the shame. At last the sea became calm. Sails went up, filled and gleamed white in sparkling sunshine. In the forecastle, the men smoked the long-stemmed pipes called tomahawks and drank tea and talked. Manjiro listened with downcast eyes to stories about gales and typhoons and ice storms around Cape Horn. Then the men told about how terrified they had been the first time they went aloft during a bad blow. "I laid myself out on a yard and stuck like glue," Jake said. The men laughed, and one of them said, "How ye react the first time be not the test. The test will be the willingness to go at all." Manjiro lifted his head, and Jake lifted his cup of tea. "To John Mung, a true sailor," he said. All right, and chapter 10 is called Honolulu. Manjiro and his friends had been aboard the John Howland for 5.5 months when the ship approached Honolulu. Captain Whitfield, and that's in Hawaii. Captain Whitfield had told Manjiro that Honolulu was a port city on the island of Oahu. Oahu is the main island of the Kingdom of Hawaii, a good friend to the United States, he had said. When Manjiro went below, then came back topside, the John Howland wowed at anchor, well out from the port. "So many ships," he said in a low, awed voice. Hundreds of merchant ships and whaling ships from many countries lay at anchor side by side. Billy came up to him. "Wind's out," he said. "We can't get in yet. While we're waiting, Captain Whitfield's gone ashore to make arrangements for you and the others to stay in Honolulu." It saddened Manjiro that he would have to bid farewell to the men of the John Howard. Many of them had become his good friends, and he had great affection for Captain Whitfield. For 2 days and nights he did not see Captain Whitfield, but when they were able to get into port, the captain himself escorted Manjiro and his friends onto shore. All the activity made Manjiro dizzy. Crates of fruit and vegetable and other food supplies were being loaded into boats to be taken out to ships. Seamen wearing caps, breeches, and coats of various styles haggled with brown people wearing bright clothing. And there, while one group of sailors made music, others danced with women. Merchant and whaling men spoke in a variety of languages, and some argued loudly. In his country, Manjiro had never been anywhere but to the neighboring villages, but he had heard stories about cities where scowling samurai flashed their long swords if a crowd grew noisy. Here, no one made an effort to control the crowd. No one even gave way, much less bowed to another. Manjiro edged closer to Captain Whitfield. A pretty, smiling woman with black hair so long it hung down her back was coming toward them with a garland of flowers. She was smiling at Captain Whitfield. The captain was bending down to let her put the flowers around his neck. Manjiro knew that behind his toast of friends' unruffled expressions, they were amazed and even horrified. No, Toraman was not horrified. A tiny smile twitched at the corner of Toraman's mouth, and he said, "Oh, to be Captain Whitfield." He said it in his own language. And Fudonoju, serious-minded Fudonoju, laughed at his friend's remark. They're so lucky. He's lucky that the woman is putting flowers around them. When he had guided them through the port into the town, where people ambled rather than rushing about, Captain Whitfield said, "The real Honolulu." From the way he said it, Manjiro knew the captain had great affection for his town. As they walked, tears came to Manjiro's eyes. How glorious the sight, how precious the smell of plants, from trees to the smallest flower. And no man-made music could match that of a songbird. But he had heard sound even more wonderful than the bird songs, the laughter of children playing. His little sister and her friends laughed like that. The captain brought them to a house where they met a man named Dr. Judd. "Captain Whitfield has told me about your rescue," Dr. Judd said in a clipped, formal voice. He picked up a small sack, opened it, and dumped coins out on the table. Manjiro couldn't help it. He sucked in his breath. The coins were like those used in his country. Unprepared, Fudonoju and Jisuke were also unable to mask their excitement. "Ah," Dr. Judd said, "Dai Nippon Te Kuku?" Manjiro felt sick. This Dr. Judd knew the name of their country, and he had some of its coins. He must also know that their country had imprisoned shipwrecked American sailors, had even put some of them in cages. And Dr. Judd knew from their reactions that Dai Nippon was their homeland. Captain Whitfield would despise them now, and maybe they would be put in prison. Fudonoju began to talk rapidly, to explain that they were poor fishermen, that they had been caught in a storm, and that Kuroshio had taken them to a rocky, barren island. When he paused for breath, Dr. Judd shook his head and lifted his hand, palm outward, I guess like this. "I know only a few words of your language," he turned to Captain Whitfield. "You were right in your guess. They are Japanese." Captain Whitfield had known. Captain Whitfield nodded and then said, "John Mung understands English quite well." "Ah," Dr. Judd said again and looked at Manjiro. "Then you can translate to your friends when I have finished." Manjiro quickly became confused. He was not accustomed to Dr. Judd's voice, and Dr. Judd made long sentences and used strange words. While Manjiro pondered the words anti-trading stance and prohibitive laws, he lost what Dr. Judd said next. He picked up a brief sentence. "None are still here." The last part had something to do with the man to whom the coins had belonged, but he didn't understand that. When Dr. Judd fell silent, Manjiro looked at Captain Whitfield. The captain's eyes twinkled, but he offered no help. Manjiro explained the part he had caught. The part that was important to his friends. None of their countrymen were here. "We have heard that Dutch ships go to our homeland," Fudonoju said. "Is there perhaps one in the harbor on which we could work our passage?" When Manjiro translated, Dr. Judd stared at Fudonoju. "A Dutch captain would have to be a madman to take you to Japan," he said. "And you," he shook his head several times as if Fudonoju were also mad. Manjiro started to translate, but Fudonoju stopped him. "I understand," he said. Since it had taken concentration to translate from Japanese to English and back again, Manjiro didn't think until then about what what Dr. Judd had said. Why would a Dutch captain have to be a madman to take them to Japan? And why did Dr. Judd apparently consider Fudenoju crazy for trying to find a way for them to go home? Did not all people love their homeland? Dr. Judd has found a place for you to live, Captain Whitfield said to Manjiro and his friends. You need not concern yourselves about expenses, Dr. Judd added. The Hawaiian government will take care of them. Thank you for all you've done, Dr. Judd, Captain Whitfield said. He turned to Manjiro and his friends. I have work to attend to now. We will need to make repairs and purchase provisions. We will probably be here for 4 weeks. I'll see you again before we sail. And that's the end of chapters 8, 9, and 10 of Born in the Year of Courage.